I want to move all the Kobes, but the Hogans, I don't want to move anything.
What's up, wrestling fans, trading card collectors? Welcome to another episode of Wrestling with Cards. Today we've got Rob Girard on the show from the Sportscard Therapist Podcast. You can check out the Sportscard Therapist Podcast on all popular podcast platforms, as well as on YouTube. Links in the show notes for that. And I definitely recommend you check out Rob's podcast. He's bringing a lot of different things to the table that a lot of other podcasts aren't doing. The fact that he isn't afraid to admit his mentality and changing within the hobby when he's wrong, when he's right, to talking about how mental health and the hobby have correlation. And maybe the most shocking thing of all is Rob actually takes the time to talk about wrestling cards on a platform that's a sports card podcast. Amazing. He doesn't just gloss over it like all those other jabronis on those sports card podcasts do, just mention wrestling in passing. But as you will find out on today's episode, Rob has kind of evolved into a vintage hardcore wrestling card collector. And as if you needed any more of a reason to go check out Rob's podcast, yours truly was on the podcast just a few weeks ago. So please go check that out. But before we get into our conversation with Rob, just a few reminders of how you can continue to help show your support for my content. The easiest thing you can do, and it's free, is hit that subscribe button, give me a like, and share this with any wrestling fans or sports card fans out there that you think may dig this show. Make sure you check out the podcasts I'm involved with. Wrestling with Cards, the podcast, kind of an offshoot or companion piece to these videos, audio only, talking about some different stuff I don't talk about here. Some of it's the same stuff. Some of it is kind of revamped and changing thoughts on certain topics. Also myself and Tony Vella from WrestlingTradingCards.com, which don't forget to use that website. It's a great tool for wrestling cards. We're doing the Worlds Collide podcast, both of us coming together to banter about all things wrestling, putting out episodes each and every week for you, the fans. Also available on all popular podcast platforms. Please subscribe to both of these podcasts. Leave us a review on whatever you're listening to. It'd be greatly appreciated. And then check out the links below in the show notes when you're checking out the links to Rob's podcast. Make sure to check out my links as well. I've got all my links to the social platforms down there, Spotify, TikTok, Instagram, all that's down there, as well as links to my Patreon, which is slowly growing by the day. We're still in the single digits, but we're working on it. You're going to want to be a member of that community for exclusive content and ways that you can kind of help steer the direction of the content of this show. And as always, I'm staying caffeinated, and a lot of you guys have sent in donations to help keep this thing filled with iced coffee. I am greatly appreciated. The coffee is helping me put these videos out. Having a blast doing it. Thank you guys for all of your support. But enough of that. Let's get over and talk with Rob Girard from the Sports Card Therapist Podcast. What's up, everybody? We've got Rob Girard from the Sports Card Therapist Podcast. Welcome to Wrestling with Cards.
Hey, man, how you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. And I just want to give people a brief, actually, I'm going to let you do it. Give yourself a brief description of yourself into the hobby, what you do. Again, you know, if they want to find out the details of this stuff, they can go check out your content. Of course, we want to push them that way. But a lot of people in the wrestling card space, they have a hard time looking at content creation outside of their lane. And really, I think your content is one of those long list of great content creators out there that's not necessarily wrestling driven, but there's a lot of good information that can kind of funnel into wrestling. So I'll just let you give a brief introduction.
No, I appreciate that, man. Definitely. And I want to say I'm a listener of both podcasts of yours.
Thank you.
And yeah, so I'm a licensed therapist by day job, and I'm also an avid sports cards collector and, big wrestling fan. You know, I grew up being a Hulkamaniac like many of us did. And, in my opinion, the golden age of wrestling, which was in the 80s and the early 90s, I was a huge fan. And just because I'm a full-on sports fan, a full-on sports card collector, big Yankees and Giants fan, being from Connecticut. So I'm also a wrestling card collector, though, and there are not many wrestling card content creators out there. I think really you and your partner over there and Tony Bella, that's really just like a short list of a handful of content creators there are. So, I think, given that I try to give wrestling cards a little bit of shine on my podcast when I can, I think it was inevitable that we were going to link up, and it's definitely a pleasure.
Yeah,
And you were on my pod last week, or a couple weeks ago. I don't know when these are going to air, but you were on my pod not long ago. So
yeah, thanks for having me on again. And, continually, like you said, just help spreading the word of wrestling cards because not enough people are talking about it. Again, not a pump and dump. This is just something that, as you get into the wrestling card space, you realize, oh, these guys actually just latch onto these things and don't sell them. So talk about, again, I don't want to get into a lot of the how you got into the hobby, what you collect, stuff like that, because I want people to go subscribe to your podcast and go check that out. But what I want to know is how did you kind of transition into wrestling cards when you got back into the hobby as far as like a sports card guy and just the process there?
yeah, I mean, like I said, growing up a Hulkamaniac and coming into adulthood, and we grow up and we get our big boy jobs and we have our careers, and even though I think most of us feel like kids, and we were able to kind of buy some of the things we want and really give it the attention that we want. So definitely, aside from Eli Manning and Derek Jeter and Don Mattingly and those kind of guys that I love, Hulk Hogan was just always up there, and Hogan, similar to Michael Jordan, just transcended the sport.
Yeah.
And Hulk Hogan transcended wrestling. And getting back into collecting, uh, one of the first things I did was seek out Hulk Hogan cards. I was just constantly looking at Hulk Hogan cards, and I think, like most, I don't know if you want to say mainstream collectors, but I knew about the yellow and blue Topps Hogan rookies, and so I started to really snatch those up, and I'm collecting them, getting them graded, all that, and then I stumble upon this 1982 set that doesn't get a lot of shine, but in terms of hardcore wrestling fans, is really the iconic set. So that's kind of what I've been doing, and most of my time is really spent on this set, even more than like the three major sports. I mean, I'm all about the wrestling all-star set, and learning as much as I can and just absorbing as much content as I can. And like a lot of us, I think, whether if you're a collector or a content creator or listening to other content creators,
Sure.
and I love listening to the wrestling podcast that you guys have.
Thank
It's
you.
just a blast.
Yeah, and likewise, like I like listening to your show. I like listening to some of the other content out there because I just think that we can all give each other different perspectives to help us in different lanes. Prime example of, like, I like to talk about modern wrestling, but it sounds like you're mainly into the 82 because are you watching very much modern at all?
So I have this the short answer is kind of. So I do not watch the modern wrestling in real time. However, I have this TV service that is, and I don't think I've told you about this. I don't know if you ever heard. It's called Cut the Cord. So
Mm-mm.
they have a 24/7 WrestleMania channel,
Nice.
and it is nothing but in chronological order, 24 hours a day, no commercials. WrestleMania is airing nonstop. They have a 24/7 SummerSlam channel. So usually at night, my thing is I click on the WrestleMania or SummerSlam channel. My wife is on her phone in bed, so she zones out. And I have a 50-50 chance of hitting an earlier SummerSlam or a modern SummerSlam. So regardless of what's on, it stays on. So I am really getting introduced to a lot of these modern wrestlers a little bit later than normal. So not in real time. However, I have been up on some of I watched the entire the newest SummerSlam. So
Mm-hmm.
I am up kind of on the modern stuff. Now, as far as modern cards goes, the only thing I've really been buying up are some Topps Chrome, and I've been buying up a lot of the refractors and stuff just because I know that rare and scarce is really the way to go, I guess.
I think that also probably helps you coming from a sports card background. Like, you see what's kind of going on there and you can carry it over into wrestling because I think that's where a lot of people are not looking at. Like, if you know kind of thing. But there's so many people in the wrestling card hobby that are, set collector completists, or maybe they just want that rookie card. But then when you start digging, like you said, you've got that rare, scarce, parallel number stuff. Going back to the All-Stars, do you think you're going after that set because those are the names you grew up with and you loved, or is it more that it's an iconic set in wrestling?
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think first of all, I think it's human nature. It's part of our psychology to really have what others want,
Sure.
and I will say I started jumping into this set, I think, before I realized the enormity in the legacy of this set. But yeah, I think that's part of it for sure. But yeah, to see some of these cards, whether if it's Ted DiBiase, Dusty Rhodes, Andre the Giant, and these cards were made really when they were before they were superstars. Now, Andre the Giant was Andre the Giant, right? He was bigger than life when these cards were made, but Hulkamania hadn't started when these cards were made. And if it did, it was just, no one knew about it,
Right.
So to see their stories before their careers really took off, it's just something really cool. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm drawn to this set. And when you look at the icons, I think, in our hobby, who, because we're content creators, we've had the privilege of really being able to conversate with, whether if it's Rob England or David Peck, you ask them what's the most iconic set, they're always going to say 82, I would imagine. So and I loved your story, by the way, of the Hogan and the PSA reveal and all of that. That was awesome. That was awesome on your channel. That's, and I know that you take a lot of pride in really just doing nothing but flipping your way up little by little. So to see you end up with a card like that, which, I know I don't have a PSA graded Hogan, autograph, so it's like, man, to see you have it, you absolutely have something I want. And I know there's something that feels really good when you hear someone say that, right?
Yeah. And it's, I know there are a lot of people out there to flex that, I did the video because I wanted to show off the story behind the card, because a lot of times I think that more people find the story, and, we're talking wrestling here. That's what it's, wrestling is storytelling. And I think a lot of times people neglect that part of the hobby, and they don't realize, like, people love stories. And if you have a good story behind a card, how you got it, what it means to you, stuff like that, people will latch onto that. And that's really what I wanted to do with that card. I mean, come on, it's a PSA 2, but I don't care. I thought it was just a fantastic card. And something else I want to talk about real quick on the 82, 83 All-Stars, and this just could be something with me and you and a few others. I don't think a lot of the mainstream appreciates it because maybe they didn't watch Memphis wrestling in the mid 80s. Maybe they don't go back on the network and watch World Class Championship Wrestling or the AWA. And for us that are historians that love wrestling history, or if we grew up on it, or we just have an interest in a character, I think this set is encompassing all of those things, because I can say, honestly, this is one of only like maybe 2 wrestling sets that I have a complete set of. I'm going to get them all graded, and I don't plan on ever piecing them out. This is just something that I will keep together as a set because there's so many good names in it. So just talk a little bit about the set and why you think maybe some of the names are a little bit undervalued and underappreciated.
Yeah, and you nailed it when you're talking about the different territories that, the different wrestling territories that there were really before Vince McMahon Jr. really took everything and really made it what it was. So there were a lot of wrestlers, Kerry Von Erich, I didn't know him as that. I knew him as a Texas Tornado. So because I was up here in this area, in the tri-state area where WWF is located, which let me just say, so my father was a carpet installer, hardworking man his whole life, and every day he would have to drive basically down towards Stanford, which is I-95. It is just insane, the traffic. If anyone knows the tri-state I-95, it is a parking lot. And he was driving in his van one day and he looked over, and in the lane right next to him was Hulk Hogan in a Corvette convertible, just sitting there, obviously awesome. Obviously on his way to WWF and stuff. And but yeah, that was just something random. But yeah, I think the stories that are on the back of the cards of these 82 all-stars, and they were all, all-stars, 83 all-stars, and even the Series B 82 Series B that doesn't get as much love. But the names are just so iconic, and just what they were able to do. And I know you and I talked a little bit about it on my pod a few weeks back, but some of those photos, they obviously had no idea how iconic this set was going to be, and the photographer, he's given a few interviews talking about this, but some of these photos that they used were 7 to 10 years old,
right.
And they just kind of threw, Bruiser Brody, I think, was almost a 10 years old photo that they used.
Yeah. And they just pulled them out of magazines too. David Peck's done a really good job about, comparing the actual magazine photo that was used side by side with the card. So that's always cool to see.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Now I have a question for you. I'm going to kind of turn it on you for a moment. I don't know if I answered your question fully, but I know you have a PSA Hogan, right? And you said you're going to grade it. Now, are you going to be a grading snob and only do like PSA, or are you just like, I'm going to do half SGC, I'm going to do part PSA, I'm going to like, what's your vision and where do you see yourself going with your set?
Because it's a complete set, I got the Hogan done in a PSA. I'm going to get the rest of them done PSA. I got to wait. And I don't care what the grades are. I'm not a snob like that. I'm not going to like, I can only get the 9s or 8s. Like, I don't care if it's a 1 or a 10, like whatever it gets is what it gets. Normally I'm not like, I have like SGC, I've got HGA, I've got PSA, I've got Beckett. I've got all kinds of slabs if it's an individual card, but for a complete set standpoint, I started with PSA. I'm going to end it with PSA. And the other thing is I've got a few others that are autographed too. And PSA really is the only one doing autograph authentication right now. So I have no choice but to continue down that road.
Wow. So you're going to send them out. I'd imagine you're going to do probably the cheapest, slowest route. So you're going to send them out and probably be without them for a year.
Oh yeah, I think I've got 5 or 6 submissions with them that have been sitting there for over a year now. But the thing is, like, I got into the cards so cheap and the grading cost at the time was so cheap that I'm like, I don't care if I get it back in 2 years, because a lot of that stuff was like cool. Like, I have a ton of rock refractor stuff out there. And like older, like a lot of 90s WCW stuff. And I'm like, I don't care when it gets back, I could sell it. I'll probably plan on keeping it. I'm not in a hurry to flip. So whatever, I'll wait.
And again, I think, part of the reason why when I got into the hobby, right, back into the hobby, and when I started doing the podcast, I was strictly collecting. I had never sold a card up to that point. I had never flipped a card. And I've been pretty transparent with what my evolution has been really in this hobby. And one thing I've realized, and you and I have talked about it before, is that if you really want to climb the ladder to having a PC you are truly, truly proud of and passionate about, you have to do some work. You have to get down in the weeds, and you need to buy that $3 card, send it out to a grading company for $30, wait 3 months. You need to flip it, try to make what you can, and just work your way up, because no one's made of money here. I know I'm not. I don't think you are.
Nobody. Most people aren't. I don't know. David and Rob might be with the collection they have at this point.
But. Oh man, and I tell you, their collections and their sets are just, definitely something that, they're definitely collections I aspire to have one day, but not saying I want to emulate anyone else's collection, but it's always nice to have a vision, and it's like, in my field, we call that really having like a treatment plan. If I'm working with a client, we have a 30-month goal, 6-month goals, and then we have that 1-year treatment plan. And it's like, we can always change what the end goal is, but as long as we know we're moving in that right direction, then I don't care what I end up with. And that's truly how I feel with my PC too, because when I went to National, my grail card, my absolute grail card at the time, was getting a 2000 Bowman Tom Brady rookie. To me, the book value on that was around $3,500. And I'm like, I don't see how I could end up with that. I'm not going to spend $3,500 cash on it. I don't think I'm going to be able to make the moves to get up to that. But I ended up doing it. And I said, I'm never going to part with this card. 6 weeks later, I end 6 weeks later. Oh my God.
That's so
It's
pro
almost embarrassing.
wrestling. Never say never.
I know. Listen, it's almost embarrassing to say it, but what I ended up doing was I ended up finding the exact same card as that Tom Brady rookie, but I found them in chrome. So I
Nice.
found two separate chromes. So I sold my PSA 9 and flipped that money into buying two chromes. So it's like I'm continuing to kind of climb the ladder, as far as the PC goes, and it's a blast doing it. And when it comes to wrestling cards too, it's such an undervalued market, and I think that's something that people like Rob England, David Peck, yourself, you guys were really able to see that kind of stuff early on, and hopefully you benefit from it, and when you do want to cash out, you will be able to.
Something I want to ask you, again, I don't want to spoil your content. Everybody go back and
No,
check out.
please do spoil my content.
No, you're telling a story on your content. They got to go back and you got to get the listens and the views. But what I want to know is people in the wrestling card space, a lot of them we've talked about, they don't like to sell their cards, but yet sometimes it comes down to, okay, I want this bigger card or I want to complete this collection. As somebody who's just been, you've said it yourself, you've been recently learning how to be more transactional, not because you want to flip stuff just to flip stuff, but because you're trying to get bigger pieces. If you're wanting wrestling cards, you're selling, football, selling soccer, selling basketball, whatever. What kind of advice would you have for people who are in the wrestling card space that mainly just doing wrestling cards, whether it's wrestling cards or outside of that? What advice would you have for some of these people to just become more transactional in the mindset and let go of things?
Yeah, great question. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to give any answer that probably hasn't been given 10 times already on your podcast and other podcasts I've listened to, but I think I always want to say, like, eBay is the way to go. But for me, the relationships aspect was unbelievable. And I think about when I got back into this hobby, some of my early transactions that I made were just like trades with people in Connecticut or trades with someone maybe I sent out in the mail. And I look at some of those early transactions as really kind of getting my gears lubricated to, like, okay, you know what, I can start moving some product here. So I started small. I didn't want to really move anything that was big. And I tell you what, when it comes to the wrestling cards, that I feel like that's like truly my PC right now. I think I have nine Hogans, the blue and yellows. I have about 9 of those out at grading right now. And my whole thought was, okay, I'm gonna, probably move like 7 out of 9 of them, keep 2 of them. And I'm like, I don't think I want to get rid of any of them. And I don't think I will. I really don't. I don't think I want to, but I also have 5 Kobe's out at grading. I want to move them all. I'm praying I get 9s and 10s. I want to move all the Kobe's, but the Hogans, I don't want to move anything. So, but what I've been able to do is the whole eBay thing. I haven't really jumped in with both feet on the eBay thing, but going to shows was huge for me. Going to shows, and let me tell you something, I was planning on going to national. I went to national, but what was cool was right as shows started to open back up, I went to a local show, a Norwalk, Connecticut show, right? It was a local show. It was kind of slow, it was kind of small, but I was able to see what's going on. I was able to see what people are buying, see what people are selling. I met a dealer there, young kid, probably, maybe 10 years younger than me. And he's like, oh, I'm going to national. And then lo and behold, we end up bumping into each other at Card Collector 2 trade night. I'm like, oh my God, what's up, man? Connecticut in the house. Let's go. We made a really cool trade, him and I. And from there, it was like, just by going to that show, we exchanged information. He was like, dude, this is my 3rd show selling at, being a dealer at, like, it cost me $40 for the table. You should give it a try. It's easy. It's only my 3rd show. And I was like, you know what? I think I want to do that because, like many card collectors, I'm like a hoarder of cards. So I end up with so many cards that I'm like, at the time I really wanted this and I felt like I needed it, but now I don't think I want this. I would much rather turn these 40 Michael Jordan cards into maybe 2 1982 Andre the Giants.
Right.
And then that's what I want to do. I really want to load up on these 82s to really hold long term. And the only way for me to really do that is to move some of my other sports cards, which I don't have that real emotional connection to, because Andre the Giant, Hulk Hogan, Ted DiBiase, guys like these tap into my 5-year-old childhood. Michael Jordan doesn't really, LeBron James doesn't, Kobe doesn't, but these wrestlers do.
Do you find yourself, because I find myself doing this, the more activity you get involved with, the more you're finding that that's a hobby within itself?
Yes, I love that you said that. I was just messaging with a guy last night. Now, this guy, it's so weird. I've only seen a picture of him twice ever. He lives in New York City. He's like becoming like a friend of mine, like an actual friend. I message with him all the time. And I said to him, and I'm always screenshotting him pictures of what I buy on eBay. And I said, listen, all I'm doing is moving money from one place to another. I said, even if when I go to a next show, even if I sell these for what I bought it for, it's almost like money in the bank. As long as, I'm moving money around and I'm active in the hobby and I'm learning things, to me, it's not always about making money. Sometimes it's just about moving money.
Yeah, and learning in the process. That's what it was for me. When I first really got started heavy a couple of years ago, I've always been into flipping stuff since I was a kid, like going way back, like AOL internet days when it first came out. I was printing off video game cheat codes and selling those at school for $1 a sheet.
Were you really?
Oh yeah. I've been like that my whole life. But it's like you said, the wrestling cards, like specific ones, it's I don't really want to sell that, but I just bought this sports collection. I can move that stuff, especially if it's modern. But I just love it. I love learning. I love taking losses. I know that sounds crazy, but you lose, you learn, in my opinion, and you just keep building those reps and keep going. And I think it's funny you say that it's a hobby within itself. I think if you keep doing this, I know you set up at a show recently. If you keep doing this, it keeps the hobby of the hobby going.
Yeah. And a couple things about that. One, I think I was Instagram stalking you one day, and I think I came across an old page of yours, and I saw that you used to sell like really like bizarre like memorabilia or like albums and keychains, or I forget what it was, but I was like, wow, this guy's been flipping stuff for a long time. It's not just cards. So right. I definitely think if you want to do what we're talking about, you do have to have a tiny little bit of hustler in you initially, but you really got to have the passion for what it is you're doing, and yeah, to talk about setting up at shows, I'll tell you, one of the greatest things that I've come to realize about shows, and it becomes like a drug in itself, is when you are sitting there behind the table, people come to you with their cards. People are coming to me with their cards, and they're like, hey, are you buying? Are you trading? I'm like, yeah, let me see what you got. And then all of a sudden, now I'm in the driver's seat. Now I can say, you know what? I really like this. I really like this Hogan that you got here. Or I like this Andre card that you got here. But I'm not really buying. But if you see something in my case you like, maybe we could work out a trade. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, So it's amazing. So I would absolutely, if I could give any kind of recommendation to anyone, it would be go to shows. Go to shows, because having cards is great. Networking online is great. But that in-person interaction and the in-person stuff, I think, is something that is lacking with how big social media is now.
It's a really good point. I don't go to a lot of shows just because there's not a ton around me. And usually when I do go, it's vintage baseball. Like even there's not a lot of modern stuff out there. So I'm like, well, there's definitely not going to be wrestling. But that's a really good point that I just don't think a lot of people, specifically within wrestling, talk about. And maybe that's just because there's not a lot of wrestling. Did you see a lot of wrestling at the National? And how about this most recent show you did? Did you see very much wrestling there at all?
So funny thing. So Brett from Stacking Slabs, we had been, going back and forth on IG and just, talking and blah, blah, blah. And I was at a table and I commented, the guy go, oh, you have 82 wrestling all-stars here. Awesome, man. I'm just kind of making conversation with him. I move over, I start going through his dollar box, and all of a sudden I hear someone mention the 82 all-stars again. I look over and it's Brett, which nice. It's crazy because there was literally thousands and thousands of people there and hundreds, if not 1,000 tables. It felt like it was impossible to find anyone there. So us bumping into each other was nuts, but I really only saw 2 tables that had wrestling all-stars, and then maybe a handful of others that had any kind of wrestling. And at this last show I did in New Jersey, it was in Woodbridge, New Jersey, there was probably about 60 tables, 60 dealers there. I'm pretty positive I was the only one that had wrestling cards, and wrestling cards are my biggest seller. I mean, I got rid of like PSA 6s of Sting and Flair, like in a match. It was a WCW card. It was Sting and Flair's like 1990 card. It was a PSA 6. I mean, I don't even think it was worth the $25 I had a price tag on it for. You could probably get it for $10 on eBay, but the guy saw it and he goes, Sting's my favorite wrestler. I want it. He didn't even try to talk me down. He goes, I want it. Another guy came over. He was a tattoo artist. He commented, because I know you're ranked up. I got my arms are done. So so a tattoo artist came over. We're talking tattoos. And he goes, oh, my coworker's favorite wrestler is Macho Man. I'm going to take all your Macho Man. He pulled out a stack of my Macho Man Raw. And it's like, I think I was the wrestling guy at this last card show. And so I'm booked for another show with my buddy in New York City. We're actually doing a show in January of 2022, right across street from Madison Square Garden. That's going to be insane. Can't wait for that.
Talk about some real nostalgia there.
Oh my God, absolutely. So I said to him, I said, listen, this last show that I just did in Jersey, I saw the demand for wrestling cards. I am going to be the wrestling card guy at this show. I'm going to bring all my wrestling except for 82 all-stars and just see what happens, and I have a feeling I'm going to sell out. And I think I'm going to make a big sign saying wrestling cards, because no one has them in the hobby, the genre of cards. People want them. There's a demand for them.
That's interesting and a really good transition I was going to talk to you about anyway. Talking about that, what are you seeing as far as sports card collectors? You know who I'm talking about. These guys are just so into just the regular big 3 sports. Yet you're talking about at shows, huge demand for the wrestling cards. We're not seeing it on social platforms as much. We're not seeing it on podcasts outside of like yours and Brett's. People just mention it in passing. Like, what do you think the disconnect is there? And what are you seeing at these shows that's creating a demand in person that we're not seeing online?
Well, I was actually listening to your podcast not too long ago in your interview with Rob England. I know that you did a 2-part series on it. And you guys had mentioned how the bottom has moved up and it's probably never going to go that low again. So basically, whatever the baseline is, it feels like this is probably the baseline. I think once people see, and you've talked about before, right? What's the first 6-figure wrestling card going to be? The more we see these wrestling cards getting in the news, getting in the media, getting this coverage for being big selling, when people realize there's money to be made with wrestling cards, you don't want anyone to come in and like cannibalize this genre of
Sure.
sports card collecting. But at the same time, in my opinion, anytime there's an influx of money, and whether if it's investors or it's collectors, that's always good, right?
Sure.
And so I think when people realize, whoa, you can make money off wrestling cards, let me tell you, when it comes to Pokemon and I see a Magic set behind you, when it comes to Magic, to me, I'm like, why would anyone collect Pokemon cards? Now, like, part of me says that, and then a split second later, I'm like, well, I do get it. And I think that a lot of the hobby looks at us and says, why would anyone collect wrestling cards? Yet they are investing their life savings into LeBron cards or Mahomes cards, but they look at wrestling. So once you realize, like, whoa, there's some serious money to be made with wrestling cards, I think that respect is going to come. It's all about the money, I think.
Tony said that I think mainstream people, they just don't see enough zeros behind it. But you just said it, respect, and that's all I'm asking, because I keep trying to build the community, get more people into wrestling cards, understand that, like you said, Pokemon, I don't know many people that are playing the games, but everybody loves a specific character. Pikachu, Charizard, Bulbasaur, like whatever they're attached to, it's a character, and that's what wrestling is. It's characters. And I think that all this money comes in, like yourself, I could say that we're probably not going to be selling what we have, but at least it would get the respect that all this other, fringe sports get. And that's all I'm asking for.
Yeah. No, very well said. Will it ever get the respect that the NFL gets?
Oh no.
Probably not. Probably not. But and I think we can all kind of see the difference there, right? Sport, it's an actual, you never know. There's nothing scripted about it, and that's what makes the three major sports and other sporting events so captivating.
Sure.
But when it comes to wrestling, I think we know that, even though it might not be scripted, there's usually a known outcome, unless you're Bret Hart,
Yeah.
then unless we're talking about the Montreal screw job, but yeah, I think, but it's art, man. I love it. I love it. It's like poetry on screen watching these, and I think that's probably my biggest knock on the AEW wrestling. If I had to say anything, not that I think it's great that WWE is going to get some competition.
Sure.
Hopefully, the Monday Night Wars thing, it drove up the performance and everything. But I'm watching some of these AEW matches, and it just seems like some of these wrestlers are like totally missing their marks. They're reacting to punches that aren't even landing. Like I don't know.
It's more acrobatics.
It just kind of, it seems very amateurish, some of these matches. And I think David Peck said it best, he probably said it in many different ways, but he said, listen, when I watch wrestling, I want to see someone like Brock that I believe can kill me, that scares the crap out of me.
Right.
And when I watch, and same thing with me, when I watch wrestling, I want to see someone that's larger than life, and I want to believe what I'm seeing.
Right. Yeah, I 100% agree. I guess the only caveat I have is like, I love deathmatch wrestling too, and I know a lot of people don't like that. But overall, like, it doesn't matter what. Like, have you been keeping up with the AEW Upper Deck pre-release sales and all of these things? It's nuts.
Yeah, so I haven't been to the level that you guys are, but I know that I heard on your pod that Tony Bella ordered a case or
we're supposed to be we're supposed to be splitting a case. We're gonna see.
You guys are splitting an 18-wheeler trailer or something
Hopefully.
like that. That I did hear though, but yeah, so I would imagine that if anyone can get their hands on those cards and probably hold them, I would imagine they're going to be collector's items. Even the XFL probably has some collector's items, from back in 2000.
Yeah, I think just overall, I'm with you. Like, I don't miss it. Like, I don't watch, actually, unless it's a pay-per-view or some big event, I don't watch a lot of wrestling in real time, but you better believe the very next day I'm finding the, cut up version of the show. And I don't usually miss any AEW stuff, but I'm with you. It's not as hard hitting. It's too much acrobatics, but it doesn't matter what I like, because if the crowd is reacting to that and it's pushing wrestling, pushing WWE to be more competitive, other promotions to be competitive, and maybe for our sake of talking here, pushes the hobby of wrestling cards, because I've never seen a wrestling card set with the anticipation that these AEW cards have. Like, it's the pre-order prices just keep going up and up and up on the boxes. We've seen the Topps EPAC cards, CM Punk cards were like $6. Now we're seeing them sold for 50, and like the physical copy isn't even out yet. So even though me and you may not be as big of fans, it's driving wrestling up, and like, I can only be thankful for that.
Yeah, and AEW is really, for them to be promoting the trading cards on national television.
Absolutely.
That's really impressive. That's something that I don't think I ever saw Vince McMahon do with any of his trading cards. It seems like, when it comes to WWF or WWE, trading cards were kind of always an afterthought. It was more about merchandise and memorabilia, but which is a whole different genre in itself, right? Is the memorabilia thing, and which is awesome. Memorabilia is great. I had a ton of Hulk memorabilia growing up, but there's just something amazing though about the trading card and being able to hold the trading card in your hand, and it's and you can hoard them too. It's hard to hoard memorabilia. You got to end up buying a bigger house to hoard memorabilia.
That's exactly what I was getting ready to get. Like, I used to collect figures like hardcore. I dumped all of them, put all of that into cards, because my cards take up a fraction of the space. And I was seeing on the secondary market, unless you have a really rare piece of memorabilia, action figures, certain autographed 8x10s, like stuff like that just isn't holding the value that a PSA 2 Hogan holds. So just interesting out there. Transitioning back to talking about a hobby within a hobby, and let's talk about creating content. Like, what got you started down that rabbit hole? What made you want to start a podcast? And how has that been as far as like participating in the hobby without transactionally buying cards, still being involved by doing a creative project like this?
Yeah, great question. I talk for a living. I love talking. I'm an extremely social person. They say opposites attract. So my wife is like an introvert, pretty quiet. I'm an extrovert. I'm always kind of talking. And you know, I've done like, I've always done something similar to this. Like, I've had like a radio show that I did that was, it was like, a hip hop radio show. I'm a huge hip hop historian, like love it. Um, Sports, anything I'm interested in, I always completely throw myself into. And mental health. I have a mental health podcast as well that I've been doing for, a couple years now, which has been great. And getting back into this hobby and listening to the content creators such as yourself, such as Brett from Stacking Slabs, I can name a few. I've listened to a lot of content, but there's only a few content creators I go back to and listen to on a regular basis, and just being inspired by, people like you that continuously put out good content and keep me updated. Because when I'm listening to a wrestling podcast, what I'm doing is I'm getting updated on all the wrestling news. So what that's doing is that's saving a lot of my personal time of having to go out and search for this wrestling news myself, and I can get a lot of the wrestling update in a 12-minute podcast on Wrestling with Cards, or on a 45-minute podcast on Worlds Collide. You know what I mean? So it's I podcast everything now. I don't listen to the radio anymore. I rarely listen to music. I'm just always listening to podcasts, and because it's a constant education. And you got to figure, with all this podcast availability, our heads are probably going to, as we continue to evolve, our heads are probably going to get bigger because our brains are going to be taking in so much more, right? I mean, I would imagine
there's a lot to learn, and I wouldn't be where I'm at if, like, I wouldn't have started. I told you I was flipping stuff when I was a kid, and I always have had that mentality. But like, if it wasn't for Gary Vee, like 5 years ago, saying, who cares what people think? Put out content, shut out the outside, do your thing, focus on what you want. If it wasn't for, people in the hobby, out of the hobby, putting out content like that, I wouldn't be where I'm at. And your podcast always has an interesting twist to it because it's casual. It's not like, what's the biggest sale? What's your favorite PC? It's like, hey, what do you, what's your favorite artist in music? Or, the mental health thing, which actually, if you want to touch on that, like how does doing the mental health podcast and sports cards, like how does that work together and help you?
Oh man, I tell you, I think a big part of what I do for self-care is the hobby. And it's almost like, so I work for a living, I have my family, I look at like life as kind of like a pie, right? And it's like, if I have 6 slices of this pizza pie, one slice is going to be family, one slice is going to be employment, one slice is going to be friends, one slice is going to be my health, one slice has to be doing something for myself. And this is something that I always try to inform people on, whether if it's like my clientele or inmates I work with, is we need a hobby. We need something that we can do that's fun. Because if you tell me, Rob, you have to work 40 or 50 hours a week, you have to come home, you have to mow the lawn, you have to do all this stuff, you have to pay your bills, and you don't have any time for a hobby, by the way, it's just wake up and repeat. It's like, well, what am I doing all this for? I need to have something that I can just feel good about, that I can get lost in. Some people binge watch, some people do arts and crafts, some people do cards. I love to do cards. And I felt like, kind of like that message that you got from Gary Vee. It's like, I didn't know if anyone was going to really like the whole, the twist of, self-care and collecting, but it was something that just kind of came natural to me. And I think when it's something that is when you're being yourself, kind of like Zhan is being himself, it kind of comes easy. It doesn't really feel like work. It doesn't feel like a job. It's something that's still enjoyable. So I still look at doing the podcast as self-care, which is strange, right? Because it feels like it might be work. You have to schedule things around, but it feels good. It's almost like my form of therapy.
I don't know about you, but I guess maybe from the video perspective, because I do interesting topics on the videos. It's a really
You have
fun,
great videos, by the way.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's a creative outlet. Like it's fun. Like, yeah, it takes a lot of time to edit. It takes a lot of time to shoot them, piece them together, come up with an idea, come up with bullet points. But putting it all together is a fun, creative thing. And then stuff like this, we'll turn this into a video. It's the fact that, you build these relationships with the people you're interviewing, and you get to look forward to having a chat with this person or having a chat about a controversial card topic over here. It's just, creating content has just been a fun, creative outlet and build relationships at the same time. And I'm sure you found that as well.
Yeah. And to go back to, kind of bounce off this and what we were saying before, like, and this just came to mind, but remember the Chris Jericho card that was going for like 100,000 or whatever it was going for? How I learned everything about that. And that was huge in the wrestling card arena, right? Everyone was talking about that. That was like, but how I learned about that and how I got educated on that, but was by listening to you and by listening to Worlds Collide. And that was kind of cool. It saved me the time and energy of having to like seek it out myself and say, okay, so put it onto the car on the way to work. Boom, there I go. Now I'm informed by it. And now not only can I take what I heard from you guys talking about the wrestling card market, but I can also apply that to regular sports cards.
Right.
And when, talking to David Peck, and I'm like, are you ever going to sell all these sets? He's like, well, if I ever sold all the sets, I would. Yeah, exactly. He said, but if I ever sold all the sets, I would dilute the market. I'm like, man. So when he said it like that, I'm like, man, can I imagine owning so much of one thing that if I were to sell, and it could be anything. Imagine owning so many houses that if you put them all up for sale, it dilutes the real estate market.
Right.
So for him so everything that I learn and listen to and absorb about the wrestling card market, I can truly apply to bigger life situations.
That is a great aspect that I haven't even said, but I mean, I believe you, because now that you say that, I've gone back and been like, there's things about wrestling or wrestling cards that you can put towards life and learn a lot about. So very good perspective there. Last question is totally random that I just thought about. You mentioned hip hop, and guess what? It's my show. And if it's not wrestling card related, we can still talk about it. What are some of your favorite artists?
Current or all time?
All time.
So all time, I'm definitely an East Coast person. Connecticut. I spent a lot of time in New York growing up, and so I think if I were to, probably the typical generic answer, which would be definitely Jay-Z, Biggie. Probably my favorite artist of all time was an individual that I interviewed for one of my shows many, many years ago, which was Prodigy and Mobb Deep.
Oh yeah.
Love Mobb Deep. Mobb Deep's probably my favorite hip hop group of all time. Just today, all day when I was driving around, I was actually listening to podcasts for a while today. I did a lot of driving today. I probably drove for about 4 hours today. Half the time I listened to podcasts, the other half the time I was listening to Big Pun.
Nice.
So love some Big Pun. Yeah. And there's not a ton of, I don't know. I kind of like everything, it's like, if Drake gets so much hate, he gets so much hate. I mean, you are not cool if you say you like Drake. There is nothing cool or edgy
Valid
about
point.
that. But I'll tell you I'll tell you what though, when he wants to put out some real hip hop stuff, no one current day can do it better. It's just unfortunate that there's usually only like 3 real hip hop cuts per album for him. But yeah, I would definitely say I'm a Biggie, Jay-Z, Mobb Deep kind of guy.
East Coast. It's interesting how like
Coast,
where we listen, where we live, and the closest sound that we absorb. And it's the same with wrestling. Like, so where I'm at in Missouri, Memphis and Southern sound as far as hip hop goes. That's my thing. Like
3-6 Mafia,
3-6 Mafia, Suicide,
8-Ball MJG.
yeah, all that stuff. I love it, absolutely love it. But then on the wrestling aspect, like Memphis wrestling is some of my favorite historical stuff ever, because it's like carny, it's violent, it's like everything I like about wrestling. It's serious, it's funny, it's, you know, crazy, and it's just interesting how where we're at dictates what we like.
Definitely. And you know, it's stuff like that that I think, you know, we don't really think about until you're having these conversations. And not to name drop David Peck again, but I remember talking with him and him saying like, well, you know, growing up, you know, I used to watch a lot of the Florida stuff because I really couldn't, it was all territory stuff, so sure. I couldn't watch any of the East Coast stuff, so I wasn't really watching Hulk Hogan, I wasn't really watching it, and I'm like, did I just take it for granted that, you know, I'm from Connecticut and maybe I did? I mean, I don't know, but it definitely makes sense. But now a lot of the old school Memphis stuff, do you watch that stuff on YouTube still? Is a lot of that on YouTube?
Yeah. There's tons of episodes on there, and it goes from like, you know, it's sometimes it's hard to watch because it's grainy and it's a VHS.
Oh, it's like literally a video camera filming.
Well, it's like someone recorded off their TV, but it's like maybe a third generation VHS copy that's gotten uploaded from tape trading. So, but there's a lot of politically incorrect things on there. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of hilarious stuff, a lot of good storytelling. Like it's my favorite. I don't know why, but.
Did you ever do any backyard wrestling or anything?
I mean, I did when I was a kid with, like, you remember the wrestling buddies, the Hogan?
Of course I do. I had a Hogan and a Warrior.
I did my own organizations with those things, but
nice.
But no, not legitimate, but.
Nice. Now tell me, I'm gonna flip it on you now. Tell me a little bit about some of your tattoos that you got. Tell me about, because you're all sleeved up. I saw a picture of you recently in shorts. You're tatted up on the legs too. Tell me a little bit about that.
I don't know why I started getting them, to be honest. I just like, oh, I'll just get one, and then next thing I got another one, and the next thing I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll just get kind of this. Like, this arm is all 80s. Like, there's a Care Bear with a cobra from G.I. Joe logo, and he's carrying a knife. There's that's Smurfs, Transformers, Masters of the Universe, all G.I. Joe all put together there. There's a Maximum Overdrive, the movie. So this is all 80s stuff. I've got I got Buffalo Bills stuff because I'm a diehard Bills fan, although I have an Al Davis portrait because I love how Al Davis' approach to football was doing things his way, shutting out the noise, as we've talked about. And so I was like, man, I love that philosophy. I'm going to get an Al Davis portrait.
You got an Al Davis portrait tattooed on you?
Yeah, and it says, "Just win, baby, commitment to excellence."
Wow. Mind blown. That's unbelievable. That is so cool.
I'll have to send you a picture after this.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. And you are obviously someone that likes a lot of color on your tattoos. I'm not anti-color, but I'm more of a black and white guy. So I basically have black and white, but I love it, man. And I tell you, that's almost like a weird community in itself. So, you know, with the tattoos and stuff. So this morning I stopped in between jobs and I just went and grabbed a sandwich real quick. And this like woman in her 70s goes, "Nice sleeves." And I go, "Oh, thanks." And I looked at her, she didn't have any. I go, "Why don't you have any?" She goes, "Oh, my son is covered, but I love him." And I was like, "Oh, cool, man." You know, so it's almost like trading cards. Like you see someone with tattoos, like, you know, I always want to compliment people on their tattoos just because it's like, you know, I feel like that's, you know, it's our own little like subculture, you know what I mean? And I could care less what's tattooed on you, you know. I'm just always intrigued by the ink, you know, and kind of the stories behind them. So,
and tying that back to the hobby, it's the same thing with like when you see seeing somebody with a specific one or, you know, just completely covered. It's kind of like seeing that wrestling card in that casing, like, oh my gosh, you have this. Or it's like seeing that person with that t-shirt on of that band you love and you didn't think anybody else knew who they were. It's like you said, it's this weird community that we've kind of built up within ourselves.
Yeah, man, definitely. And like you said, going back to just hearing a story behind the card, you know, what's the story behind? It's like, I see the card, now tell me the story behind the card. And one thing I like to do is I like to know, what's the story behind the flip? How did you work your way up to that card? Because like you said, we see these Instagram pages that have these $5,000 cards, and there's all these all these flexes going on. And it's like, I look at these cards, I'm like, I can never make my way up to that. But then when I have a card of value, I want to be able to show people like, no, this is how I did it. It took me a lot to get this LeBron rookie, and then it took me a lot to get that LeBron rookie, but I took those two LeBron rookies and I turned those into 182 Hogan, and then I was able, so and I know I love hearing stories about people's flips. And so I figure people would like that too, so I like to talk about that stuff, and I try to be as transparent as possible. Like when I was selling at my show, so I'm buying cards from people. I'm buying cards from people that are coming up to me. And even though it's a card I might try to move at some point, I'll tell you what I paid for it. I'm like, hey, just got this Kyler Murray rookie for 120. Even though I might be trying to sell it for maybe 180 or 200, yeah, I'm going to tell you what I paid for it. I'm still going to go buy comps as far as what I'm selling it for. So you can't knock me for what I'm selling it for. So I don't know.
Transparency is always the best, and you figured this out. You also build the best relationships with transparency and leaving a little bit of meat on the bone, so to speak, in trades or sales or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the best relationships I've made with people were from a trade, or even just talking about a potential trade.
Right.
Like this friend that I have in New York, who I've never even met in person, but we've talked so much on Instagram, and we said, listen, he has this Derek Jeter auto rookie, or not auto rookie. It's an auto on-card auto, Beckett graded 9, autograph 10, that whole shebang, and I want it. And he's like, well, it's going to be $600. That's what I'm asking for. And I'm like, well, I don't want to pay 600 for it, but if I have anything for trade, he's like, yeah. We started going back and forth. We couldn't come to an agreement on anything, but we both said, hey, listen, we'll make it happen one day. We'll make it happen. It's all good. And then the friendship just kind of grew from there. And we talk like daily now. And it's just because it's our love of cards. It's our love of the hobby,
Have you got that card yet?
I haven't. No, I haven't. But still working on it, man. And I tell you, it's been like 4 or 5 months too. And but I told him, I said, listen, if you can move it, move it. Don't hold it for me. I never want someone to hold anything for me.
Right.
If you can move it, definitely move it. But I had a really good pickup at my last show that I did. Someone came up to me with an Aaron Judge on-card auto, Beckett graded 9, autograph 10. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, this has got to be at least a $600 or $700 card. I mean, this is just gorgeous. And he's like, give me 200 for it. I didn't even try to talk him down. I said, here you go, 200, boom. And I'm a big Yankee fan, so it was kind of cool. So it's in my PC, it's in my shelf. It's probably never going to leave there, and yeah.
Well, Rob, thanks for joining us today and all the great information. Let everybody know where they can find you, a little bit more about the podcast, and you should probably cut a promo on our wrestling fans here and sell them about why they should go listen to your journey on the podcast.
Yeah, guys, Sportscard Therapist, that's the name of the podcast. And I guess it's easy to have a good interview when you have someone like Zhan, who's passionate about the hobby. Yeah, man, definitely. So definitely check me out on Instagram, Sportscard Therapist, and that's how you could search me on all the podcast channels too. So yeah, Zhan, I appreciate you having me on, man. It was definitely a pleasure, and love the material. Just keep it up.
Likewise. And most people know I'm a pretty literal person. If something sucks, I usually just say it sucks, and I'm not plugging your content just because you're on the show. I've listened to your content way before episode 1. I started episode 1. It was after you started producing it, but I did go back. I didn't even listen to whatever your current episode was. I was like, all right, I'm just going to start at 1. I'm like, man, this guy's doing great stuff. And it's interesting to hear your story and how you went from a collector to understanding how you can get these big items that you have now, as well as all the great guests that you've had in between. So guys, definitely go check out Rob's content, Sportscard Therapist Podcast. Thank you for watching. See you guys. Thanks again to Rob from the Sportscard Therapist Podcast for coming on the show today and for having me on his show. Again, you can go check out my episode with him and all the other great episodes he has. He has a ton of really good guests. That is in the links in the show notes, along with all of my other links that I told you about earlier, my social platforms, Patreon, podcasts I'm involved with. Everything is down there. Make sure to check that out before you get out of here. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Give me 15 million thumbs up. Share it with a friend. But until next time, Click the videos on the screen for more great content from wrestling cards. We'll see ya.